So quiet quitting, what is it? We've heard a lot about it in the news lately. And, we've heard a lot about kind of changes in the workplace since the pandemic started. And last year, we had a session on the Great Resignation where people were deciding to quit their jobs and at a very high rate. And it made the labor market very tight during the pandemic, where sometimes it was hard to fill positions. And uh, along some of that time, you started hearing about this other phenomenon that was happening where people were quiet quitting. So, what is it? Okay. It's basically when employees decide not to go above and beyond at work, basically just to do what their job description says and nothing more. And we've heard a lot about it because it's been spreading on social media, people talking about it. I've heard that a lot of people talk about it on TikTok, but it's been something that a lot of people have been writing about. And I wonder, I mean, is this really a concern? Any of you think about that? Have you seen anybody, known anybody, thought about it yourself? That, why go above and beyond? Why not just do what the job is? Now, if you were a manager, maybe some of you are, maybe you would have concerns about people quiet quitting. Any thoughts on this as a phenomenon? Is it good? Is it bad? Is it something that we should just expect? In a class like organizational behavior, sometimes we look at motivation theories. There's one theory called equity theory, and it says that people look at what they put into a job and what they get out of it, and then they compare it to other people around them, either at other organizations who have similar jobs or at the same. And if they feel like they're putting in more than they're getting out compared to others, there's this feeling of resentment, and one way to alleviate that is to adjust how much you put into your job, to say, like, I'm going to even out the scales. And it kind of sounds like maybe your coworker is experiencing that, is that, they're saying they're cutting back on what I'm getting out of this job. Maybe I should cut back on what I put into the job. And so, I think it from the perspective of equity theory, that really makes sense. Now, is this something new? It's interesting because, when this first came out, a lot of this was like, hey, this is a millennial thing, or this is a Gen Z. Yeah, so and some of you may be millennials or Gen Z and know that everything gets blamed on you by the older people. Just know that happened to all of us. The young people are always blamed for everything by the old people. And but with this quiet quitting, it just seemed to me, it's like, well, that's really silly because it's not really something new. I think perhaps it's maybe increasing during the pandemic, but it's not necessarily different. And a lot of consulting firms work with businesses on employee engagement. They do surveys and they measure the level of enthusiasm and dedication that employees have. And one big firm that does this is Gallup. They're a polling firm. They do surveys in big organizations, and they reported that right now it's kind of at a high in terms of disengagement. For every two engaged employees, there's one disengaged employee. And so they say that it is increasing, this disengagement. And maybe it's because demands at work or the strain that we feel at work has increased with the pandemic because our working conditions have changed. Maybe it's because social media, we're communicating more about what we like and we dislike about work. And emotions are contagious. We all know that the look on someone's face can kind of change the mood in a room. And so there may be a lot of reasons for this. But again, this idea of just doing what the job description is, this is a long time tactic in unions. Unions, in order to get what they want, the pay raise or the better benefits, oftentimes have to do some kind of work stoppage, break the system and say, hey, we don't like what's happening and we're going to stop producing. And typically we think of that as a strike. But a strike is kind of a risky thing because when you go on strike, you don't get your pay, you don't get your benefits. And that can be a challenging thing. And so another alternative to this is called this work to rule. And work to rule means I'm just going to do exactly what my job description is. That's the rule. And I'm not going to do anything more. And unions have been doing that for decades. And long before anybody thought of this term of quiet quitting. And the term isn't just in the United States. Actually, last year we started hearing about this phenomenon of Tang Ping in China. And basically it's the young people saying, we're just laying flat, which means basically, it's so hard to get ahead that it's better to just live very minimally and lay down and just take the world and just enjoy life, but I'm not going to struggle for a little scrap more. And it's interesting, it's kind of like a counterculture movement, almost like the hippie movement we saw in the 60s in the United States, somewhat taking hold in China. And so it's interesting again, because, there's very different values in the United States and China and different parts of the world. But this kind of movement towards quiet quitting, till saying this questioning of, is it really worth it to go above and beyond, has, maybe peaked a bit with the pandemic.